All right, we got the man, the myth, the legend in his own mind from CBS Sports. Their senior NFL writer, Mr. Pete Prisco, joins us this morning. Good morning, Peter. How are you, sir?
Good. How are you guys?
Excellent. Yeah, I mean, it's been a busy 24 hours on the Jaguar front, so we got a lot to talk about. Free agency coming up. We'll get to Christian Kirk, Pete, but Mitch Morse announcing within the last hour that he is going to retire, ends up only playing 1 year here in Jacksonville. Where does that move center in terms of the immediate needs of the Jacksonville Jaguars?
Well, I think center was a need anyways. He didn't play very well down the stretch, and there was the rumblings during the season that it might be his last year. And in fact, some people in Buffalo were a little surprised that he even decided to play last year because he had those concussions back in the day with the Bills. So it was a major need for the Jaguars, even if he had been on the roster. But this makes it even more so of a pressing need, and they have to address it. The problem is, in free agency, if you look at the center position, Drew Dolman plays in just his own heavy scheme, and I'm not sure he's going to fit with what they want to do. Ryan Kelly's coming off injuries and has contemplated retirement, so you're kind of going back to what you were a year ago. So I think when you look at it on the surface, it's probably going to be one of those moves they're going to have to make in through the draft, and they're going to have to find a guy that can play center in the draft.
Man, but they might have to find a guy who could play right guard in the draft as well, Pete. How comfortable would you be, particularly in a year that's not supposed to be great for centers in the NFL draft, to maybe have a rookie starting at each of those positions?
Well, I think, Mike, you can get a right guard in free agency. I think that's doable. There are guys. Now, there are some with questions, don't get me wrong. Guys coming off injury, guy like, Will Fries, he'll be one, the right guard from the Colts. James Daniels, who's coming off an injury with the Steelers, good player when he's out in the field. I think they can address guard in free agency. I think the problem is addressing center in free agency. And so you look at the draft, and you're right, it's not a great draft for centers. I mean, just doing some of the work on some of these guys, you got the kid at Texas, good player, not a great player. You have Wilson, the center from Georgia, good player, not a great player. But again, you go back and you look at some of the history of the center position, you get guys in the second and third round that turn out to be pretty good players. So I think they can get a guy in the draft and make him a guy, particularly if you have veterans around him. And again, it's not depending on who they sign at right guard, they do need to get somebody to play right guard.
Pete, I don't think the team deciding to move on from Christian Kirk is a big surprise, in anyone's eyes. But what should the Jaguars' plan at wide receiver this offseason be from here?
No, it's not a surprise. And I would imagine, and I don't know this, but I would imagine they had gone to him and said, hey, look, if you do take this cut, maybe we'll give you some incentives in it, then maybe we'll do something with you. But, look, he moved on. Now you got to figure out what you're going to do. They have problems at wide receiver. They don't have guys right now other than Brian Thomas Jr., who are, you would sit there and say they're, big-time playmakers or guys you can count on to be starters. Gabe Davis is an interesting one. And, again, I said this over the course of the last couple months. Going back and watching him when he was in Buffalo early in his career, he looked like a different guy. And last year he was hurt all year. Never said anything, then finally he was out for a while. But he came into camp. I think he was hurt when he came into camp, was overweight, didn't look like the same player. So it'll be interesting to see. He's clearly on the roster. It'll be interesting to see what kind of shape he gets into. But there are guys on the market. I mean, if you're looking to address that in free agency, there are guys. A guy like Slayton from the Giants can run. He's not a great player. You're not going to have to pay him a boatload of money, but I think that's a possibility. And then you draft. People say, well, the number 5 pick, could you take a wide receiver there? If you have conviction on a guy, you could, and depending on what you do in free agency with the offensive and defensive line. So I think it's possible. McMillan is a guy, from Arizona, big physical player. You could pair him with Brian Thomas and maybe get him early in the first round, maybe even trade down from 5 and add some picks and do that. So I think there are possibilities. I think you can get a guy, whether it be can add one in free agency, maybe even add one in the draft.
Does it bother you, Pete? I know he's not a burner type, right? He's not. Nobody thinks he's a 4.4 guy. I'm talking about Ted McMillan here. But announced that he's not running either at the combine or his pro day. He's not going to run a 40. Is that a red flag, or do you just say, well, I'll watch the film and decide whether or not this guy is worthy of a top 10 pick?
It's a red flag. And in talking to people around the league, he made those kind of comments to people in those draft meetings, and it kind of turned him off. He went in there and said, the next you're going to see from me is when you call my name on draft day. Well, that can't do that. And I think his agent is kind of talk him off the ledge and make sure he runs, I think, at his pro day.
Okay.
That's what you keep hearing, because you can't go into there when you're that guy. And by the way, the tape doesn't show a burner. That's not what he is. He's a 50-50 guy, a
Right.
big receiver who can jump, and his 40 time is an issue. And so, yeah, I think he does have to run and have a good pro day workout, even if he says he's not going to do it. I think cooler heads will prevail, and I think his agent will kind of talk him down and make him work out, because that turned off a lot of people when he said that. He not only said it to the media, he said it in meetings as well, and guys want to see him work out.
Is 5 too high to draft a player with the intent of starting them at right guard?
No, absolutely not. I mean, if you – and I'll give you an example. I think the Booker kid at Alabama might be the cleanest offensive lineman in the entire draft. I know his workout wasn't great, but, who cares? He's a big power player, smart, understands the game, comes from a good system, knows all the intricacies of being an offensive lineman in the NFL. Is 5 too high for him? You would look at it and say probably so. Is 5 too high if you're going to say Will Campbell's going to be a right guard? Probably so. But at some point, we got to get past that and say you just got to have 5 good offensive linemen. And so a lot of these teams, they sit there and say, I'm not taking a guard at number 5. So what are you going to do? Are you going to force the pick at another position because you're not going to use it at the best players available because he is a guard? I think you got to get past that sometimes and just get the best football player in that spot. And if Campbell or Booker or whoever, one of those offensive linemen is your best spot and is put him at right guard, then you draft him.
Do you have much thought on Armand Membo, the Missouri offensive lineman who just, tested ridiculously well in Indianapolis? He's got the requisite size, Pete. He's like 6'4.5", 330-ish type guy. Said he's willing to play inside or outside. Is this a guy that was on your radar, and should he be on the Jags' radar?
He's on the radar, but a couple things about him. He's only practiced at guard. He hasn't played there. That's always a worry. Can you make the transition? And by the way, I'm a big believer in there's a lot of starting guards in the NFL that are masquerading as tackles in college, and they can't make the transition to the NFL. Some of the best guards in the NFL have made the transition from being a guy who couldn't play tackle in the NFL to being a great guard. And you go, Sheriff was one of them. I mean, you go back, Yonda was another one back in the day. Zach Martin, another one. That happened. And so I always watch the tape, and I try and look for guys who I think can move inside to play guard. I don't know if he can do it. I don't know if he has the mental toughness, the physical toughness to do it. He's a good athlete. I think there's better options out there. For example, the right tackle at LSU, Emory Jones, to me, looks like a guard. Now, you're not going to take him at 5, but you might be able to take him in round 2, move him inside, make him your starting right guard, and you don't have to worry about it again. So I think there are better options than Membo. I think, people get caught up in that athletic ability. There were moments where you looked at him, he had some, tough tape, some good tape, but some tough tape. I think there are better options for them.
What positions, Pete, would you like to see the team spend their first 4 draft picks on this year?
Well, I think, first off, if they're sitting there at 5 and Graham is sitting there, and I know people hate that pick because he didn't weigh in at 320, he didn't, whatever, they have to get another defensive interior player who can push the pocket. I mean, I think Smith is going to be good, provided he is focused. And, reportedly he wasn't, last year. He was overweight at times early in the season and then had the ankle injury. But when he flashed at times late in the season, I think he's the guy who can start on that defensive line. But you got to get somebody next to him. You got to get another guy who can get inside and pressure from the interior. We saw the Eagles and what they did with Milton Williams and Jalen Carter. You got to be able to push inside and rush with 4. If you can rush with 4, you can do a lot of different things on the back end. So I think if Graham were sitting there, I think that's one of their options. The worst case scenario for Jacksonville will be if Graham and Hunter are gone, and then you have a decision to make. And what do you do in that scenario? Do you force Campbell? Campbell, people say, well, what, you're going to pick Campbell. He's going to play guard, and you're picking a guard at 5, and how good is he? And so I think in that scenario, they would probably trade down. But if Graham or Hunter are there, I think they have to take one of those two guys.
All right, what if they're both gone and the other two quarterbacks go? What about Abdul Carter?
But that's another one. I would look. I think Abdul Carter might be the best player in the entire draft. And so and I have him. By the way, I have him off as well. I don't think both quarterbacks are going in the top 4, so I think he's gone as well. I think Carter might end up being the number 1 overall pick. I really do. I think the Titans are going to look at every scenario, including not taking a quarterback, and I think Carter is in play there if they can't work out a trade. So if he were sitting there, I'd race the card up. I think you can never have enough of those guys.
Hopefully, if one of those quarterbacks is there, the Jets want to jump the Raiders for that guy. And, just even a move down to 7, Pete. You pick up, a third-round pick, third and a fifth, something like that, more ammo for this team. I'd be all in favor of it.
They have 19 picks in the next 2 drafts.
They got
already,
10 this year, but they want a bunch. And you know how it is, man.
I'm with you. You can never have enough of them.
You're going to swing and miss on some, no matter how good you are.
Oh, absolutely. And I would do that with 100%. If I was sitting there and somebody wanted to go up and get the quarterback and he were there and I trade down to those spots, I would do that to get extra picks all day. Because, look, this draft isn't loaded with star power at the top, but there's a lot of middle-class guys. And if you need to get some of those guys, you can get those in round 2 and 3.
Pete, we're talking about some of the strengths maybe in this draft class. We've talked about the 2 big needs that have opened up here in the last 24 hours for the Jags. The tampering window opens up on Monday. Who is the first call you would make if you're the Jags when it opens up on Monday?
I would be careful with the free agency class. I'm not going to go crazy, and I think we're going to see a lot of overpays. But I would call on the corners. I would, Ward, Carlton Davis. I think those guys are in play there because they have to get one. It depends on the money. Murphy, if he gets out of the building in Minnesota. But I think Ward last year, if you look at the way Ward played, he didn't play very well last year. But remember, he had so many things going on in his life off the field. I think he had an infant passed away. It was tragic, and so I think he's a player. If you can get him, I think he can step in and start right away for him. So and might not be as costly as some of those other guys. So he's one of those guys I would look at. And then I would look at I'd look at the center position where what it would cost to get a guy like Kelly if you need him for a couple of years if he's willing to play. Not a mega deal, but if he's willing to play and come in, maybe you look at him. And then the guard. I think the guard market is actually pretty good, and there are guys there you can get. And I don't know if they're necessarily going to be, breaking the bank. I mentioned Fries from Indianapolis, coming off an injury. Daniels, Bredesen from Tampa is a guy to keep an eye on. Remember, he went in and started at left guard for Cone last year. So he was on a 1-year deal and did a nice job. Not a great player, but a good serviceable player.
Played
so
for league minimum, too.
Yeah, there are guys on the market you can get. They have to get a couple offensive linemen, by the way, in free agency. They might not have to be the big-time guys, but they have to get 2 or 3 guys in free agency that can step in and be part of the rotation, even if they're not the starters, because the depth of that line is awful. Let's be real. They don't have much depth, and they didn't really do a great job of drafting depth. So they need to find guys that can step in and play.
Should they have been in the Joe Tooney market? He went for a 2026 fourth rounder to Chicago.
If he had years left on that deal, I'd probably say yes. But based on where he is now, you're going to have to trade a 4 and then pay him.
Right.
And so, no. I don't think so. Not the way they're being constructed right now. No, I would not do that. Now, the Bears, they did it because, Ben Johnson saw what he'd had in Detroit with the offensive line and feels he's going to replicate that. But I would not have done that if I were them. I think they have better options than doing that.
All right, and final one for you, Pete. Pete Prisco, the GM of the Jaguars, for the moment here. DK Metcalf, Devontae Adams, Cooper Kupp, name wide receivers out there. Are you making a play for anyone in particular or looking elsewhere?
DK Metcalf, I wouldn't give up a pick and have to pay him. I'm just not doing that. Unless you want to I'll give you a 4 and then maybe, because it's basically a free agent. He's got a 1 year left in his deal, and he's going to look for $30 million.
Mm-hmm.
And that's not worth it to me. I don't like that move. So scratch him off. Cooper Kupp can't run at all. I mean, if they want to add somebody who's a reliable route runner in the middle of the field, okay, but he can't run at all. And that's one reason why the Rams are getting rid of him.
Right.
I mean, if you watch the Rams, they play, with a force field at 15 yards. Nobody goes down the field. The running back is slow. They're slow. So you don't want to get slower. So no on him as well. And then who was the third one, Mike? Devontae Adams.
Devontae, yeah.
Yeah, no, I mean, he's not going to – I don't think he's going to
I don't think he'd have any interest, right? But.
No, he won't have any interest. And also, he's turns 32, and he still thinks he might be a 1, and he certainly isn't that anymore.
Whatever he is, his birthday's in December. So whatever